Welcome to the Market Me podcast with your host, Mike Moll. Each episode of Market Me deconstructs real campaigns for actual businesses to improve their marketing efforts. Mike is the founder of Social Media House and a digital marketing consultant who teaches marketing strategy to executives and their teams from small business to Fortune 500 companies. Let's get started.
Perfect. On this episode, we have Jeremy Streten. He owns a business called Business Legal Lifecycle. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your business.
Yeah, so Business Legal Lifecycle is a concept that I came up with in another business that I run, which is a law firm here in Brisbane, Australia, where we really want to help business owners to understand what they're missing in their business from a legal perspective. So I designed a product that could be used for business owners to identify their blind spots in their business and really plan for the future of their business from a legal perspective. So that's what the Business Legal Lifecycle is designed in a nutshell to do. Got it.
And obviously the model and the cadence of this was developed from you having enough experience, seeing businesses make the same mistakes over and over. That's usually the story behind products like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the quick story is I had two cases that I was handling in my law firm where if people had just gone and got legal advice straight away, or even at any time before they did, they would have solved all of their problems. And when I asked both of them why they didn't, it was cost and time. And so I was looking for a way to let's help the business owners to get better legal advice more often. And so what I did was I looked at that time about 5,500 businesses that I'd acted for over about 15 years of being a lawyer at that time, and really mapped out when the successful ones did things and when the people who didn't do things, what failed. And so I mapped out the business legal life cycle as steps from that experience, and then really mapped that against everything that everyone's done.
Love that. Yeah, that's based on a ton of R&D going into that product. So that's cool. I mean, that it really lends a huge amount of credibility right off the bat. So that's great. So walk me through the product a little bit deeper. Like what is it all about? Is it I saw from the website that there's a book component to it, but I'd love you to walk me through it.
Yeah, so the book is just one part of that. The book is an Amazon bestseller in Australia and in the US. So I've done a book in Australia, the US, and the UK. My goal is to make legal advice accessible for all SMEs around the world, but I'm not going to do a book for every country in the world because 200 books is a lot. And so there's the book, and then there's a placement test which we've developed. So it's a SaaS, software as a service product. We originally developed that for our law firm to help us to identify blind spots in our clients' businesses. And then we realized that could easily be expanded to have other lawyers use it and other business owners use it. So we made that available as well. So it's a product that takes about 10 minutes. There's 30 questions. We just released 2.0 earlier in 2020. And it basically places you somewhere in the life cycle, and it tells you what you're missing from a legal perspective and what you need to get. And we actually won. I'm in the state of Queensland in Australia, and we won the Queensland Law Society Innovation and Law Award in 2018 for the product, which was pretty exciting. Beat out a lot of the bigger law firms on that too.
Amazing! Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so that product, the quiz product, does that have the same use in the countries where the book is applicable, or is that specific to Australia?
No, it works in all the countries that the book is applicable to. So we deliberately designed it so that, one, it was simple, that a business owner could do it easily, and two, that it would work in the UK, US, and Australia.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I mean, and coming from the small business world, and my core service is servicing small to mid-sized companies, and I think a lot of the audience falls into that bucket as well. What are some of the more common mistakes, like the things where you kind of sit back and you go, man, that was a stupid thing, like so simple, but really like why you're not, like what are some of the things that people can be thinking about around that?
Yeah, so probably the first one I would say is when people are starting up, really thinking about where they want to take their business, and especially if they've got business partners. So one of the stories I said before that there were two cases that I handled that really were the impetus for me developing the Business Legal Lifecycle as a product. And one of those was a partnership where they were I won't go through the whole story, but where they were going to develop a 30-story tower as property developers. And one of them knew that they couldn't build it. because they didn't have the money or the finance. The other one thought that they could build it, and they borrowed $1 million of other people's money to get all the approvals and get everything in place. And because they didn't know where they were going, they lost the whole development. And I've told the more fleshed out story on that in many talks around the world, actually. And the amount of times that people come up to me and go, I've heard of something similar happening, is really scary. So not knowing where they're going, and people set up these structures, they go to a barbecue, they get great barbecue advice, and that might apply to that person, but they don't go and get specific advice about what they need to do. And having a conversation up front about where you're going, that's probably the most important thing that I think people get wrong all the time. Because when you're setting up as a lawyer, I'll put my lawyer hat on for a minute, when you're setting up a structure for someone to start a business, you need to know what they want to do and where they're going. And if you don't know that, then you can't set the structure up properly. And there's no one cookie cutter approach to every situation. So that's probably the biggest one. The other one that I would say early on in business is getting the agreements with your clients. So when we start a business, and I've started 4 businesses over the years, we're all excited. We want to get in there. We want to do the work. We want to help out people, and that's awesome. And a lot of people don't bother to document their agreements with their clients or customers early on. And what that does is that works fine for the first couple of years. But then if there's a disagreement or if there's a problem, then there's no documentation, and that can cause a lot of problems. So what I always encourage people to do early on is to put some sort of agreement in place, especially with your early customers or clients, because if you don't do that, then that precipitates a whole bunch of problems down the track that you're not thinking of because you're looking at the world through rose-colored glasses.
Yeah, I can say that I've experienced that firsthand. So that does make a ton of sense. By the way, is barbecue talk is an Australian thing?
It is an Australian thing. Yeah. Okay,
so
barbecue advice is basically going and talking to your friends and basically doing what they do. And we call it barbecue advice.
Love it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think I think setting up even just the rules between the people that own it, who's responsible, who has what say. Those things are often like, no, we're going to be in it together and we're all going to work. And it's like, that's great. But, things happen, kids and injuries and new interests and all kinds of things can come up that you can never predict at the beginning. That I think, that makes a ton of sense. And luckily enough for me, the first company we ever formed I had 2 partners. We had somebody who came in early and was like, you guys need to have this. And I'm really glad that we did, because as the business, started to fail because we couldn't build the software quickly enough, it was very clear on, okay, this is how this is all going to go now. Otherwise, we would have really been scrambling and everything. There's a level of automatic greed that almost starts. I got to make sure I'm protected. I want to make sure I take care of myself. And if everyone's in that mindset, it can be a real big problem, I imagine.
Absolutely. And there's plenty of examples I could give on that. And I think the issue is that most of the time you don't need it. But I like to think of those agreements as disagreements. In other words, they're there to stop and to tell everyone what to do when they disagree, not necessarily when they agree. But it just puts that block in place to make sure that you don't have those problems down the track. So I think it's really important. And it's something that people don't want to do. And I know that lawyers often, do get that reputation and there's a reason that people don't want to do it, but I would encourage anyone listening to, if they're looking at starting a business, to do that properly, because it will save them a lot in the future. Absolutely.
So take me through, so now you've got, so the book there, or the quiz, what's the next step? Where does it go from there?
So the quiz produces a report that you take to your lawyer and says, these are the things that you need to put in place. So you take it to your lawyer, or you do it with your lawyer if you're a lawyer. I often tell my lawyer clients that they should do it with their client, because it starts a great conversation about what they have, and then it gives you a checklist of all the things that you need to do, and then you get your lawyer to do that work for you. And as you need it, you don't go in and do $10,000 worth of legal work tomorrow. You map it out and do things when you need to do them.
Got it. So it really helps kind of build the logistics and the flow of those documents that you need.
Yeah, it builds the foundations. I talk in terms of foundations, the right foundations that you need for your business. And just make sure that you've got all of those in place properly, so that when things go bad, because they will, we're all experiencing that right now, when things go bad, you need to have those things in place to save you in that time.
Got it. And so from in terms of, you know, the way that you market this, you were mentioning that you travel around, you speak quite a bit. So how have you kind of built your personal brand? It seems like it's around this product specifically. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so building my personal brand as a lawyer was always an interesting route to take, but it's been really enjoyable. So I've done a lot of speaking engagements. So I've spoken at conferences in Australia, the UK, and the US. So I've done a lot of work around that. I have a podcast that we did on this, and I actually got a couple of podcasts, but a podcast that we did on that. I promote the book through social media, do a lot of LinkedIn posts as well to build up that thought leader position in the community. So that's the way that I've been marketing it around. And my big focus right now is to get this to as many lawyers as I can to help them to help their clients, because I don't want to have a massive law firm. I have a very small law firm. That's all I want. I don't want a big law firm, and but I want to help other lawyers to be able to expand it out. So a lot of my marketing is very targeted on the lawyers, so that I can help them to help their clients. That way, you can have the best impact.
Got it. And then the way that you do that, are you licensing it to them, or are you just getting them to use it and then they're paying the fee on the back end, just like anybody else?
So they can do that, or they can subscribe. So my goal, ultimately for my business and to set myself up so that I can provide the most amount of value to them, is for the lawyers to subscribe to our service. And there's, you know, bronze, silver, gold. Is, you know, anyone who's done any marketing would understand our packages that they can do for doing the test for their clients. And some lawyers don't subscribe; they just do it for their clients or with their clients at certain times as well. But my preference would be the subscription, because that way they can add on all of the features. Yeah, as we add more features in, they can add it all in and do all that.
Got it. And so what would you say is your main selling point from a B2B standpoint? Because I imagine like a lot of these guys have the base knowledge that you're providing. And so, I mean, it seems like streamlining, simplifying it, giving something that it's like a little bit more visual, a little more impactful for their client. That's what strikes for me. Is that accurate? That's kind of the value part?
That's the value for the lawyer. Also, the average test, and we've done hundreds of these, finds between $2,000 to $3,500 worth of legal work. So for the lawyer out there, that there's a value proposition for them to get more work. Because, Mike, the thing that I've noticed, and from the stories I said before, was people come to lawyers when there's a problem. So we react to problems. We need to be better at being proactive to go and solve the problems before they occur. And our whole industry has been built on being reactive all the time. And it's really annoying, because it creates the problems that then lead to litigation that then leads to business failure. If we could be more proactive, and that's my goal, is to be more proactive, we could prevent the problems from arising before they do.
Got it. Yeah, I like that. That makes a ton of sense. I think there's too many industries that work in a reactive way that could be the other way around. So I'm curious, and you know, I think for somebody like you who wants to keep the firm small, putting yourself on the front end from the personal branding side and leaning into that as a leverage point for the marketing, I really like it. You know, it's my strategy as well, so maybe I'm biased. But I'm curious, what have you found to be the most impactful for yourself? I mean, it's obviously a bit of a combination, but do you have a bit of a measurement trigger of like, you know, when I speak, this happens, or it seems like LinkedIn is a big driver because of the traffic? Like, what's worked the best for you guys?
Speaking, it works the best, because when I can explain what it is and why it's important, that's when I get the most impact. I always say at the beginning of my speaking engagements, you're not going to hear about law here. You're not going to hear about you know, legislation says this, or this case and all that. You'll hear stories about what happened to real people and what the effect was and why I built this. And so I found those stories, and I've you know, been trained on speaking as well. Like I've engaged with someone to help me to do that properly, and she's great. She's still my coach, my speaking coach, and you know, it's all about the stories and about doing that. And I find that gets the most impact if I can get in front of a room. Not right now. If I can, in normal times, get in front of a room, then I can make the most impact, because I can help the most amount of people and show them what to do. So that speaking is a big one for me. For LinkedIn, it's more about positioning myself as the expert, not just as a lawyer expert, but positioning myself as the expert to help lawyers to help their clients. And so that's been a very deliberate play as well with what I produce on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Have you thought about producing content for like YouTube that answers very specific questions? and I didn't actually see if you had the YouTube in place before we started chatting. I just took a look at a couple of your assets. But one thing that I've been doing that's been really helpful is I have a podcast, and my podcast answers questions for a specific industry. So something that's Googleable. I would Google, how do I do this? Or marketing ideas for real estate, or different things like that. And if I have a piece of content that actually answers that question, I let them search it on Google, and then I run an ad on YouTube based on that search on Google. So the next time that person goes onto YouTube, I'm getting a 2 to 4 cents for a view of that video. And the video is named the answer to the question that they typed. Because Google search is pretty expensive, and it doesn't matter if you're providing information or the actual service. It's pretty much the same price. So I don't really want to pay $7 on Google for a click. But on YouTube, if I have videos that answer a specific question, I'll then run it against that question that people type on Google, and then answering it as a YouTube ad.
Yeah, I like it. I do have some content that's like that. Maybe not the specific questions. I think that's a great idea, though. It's something I'll definitely investigate.
Yeah, I found we've driven such cheap traffic to it. We spend maybe $20 per video, and we get between like 9 and 2,000 views. And then the average watch time of the videos is like over 17 minutes because they're 1 hour long videos. So it's been impactful. Really
cool.
Impactful for us. Yeah. So I'd love to pick your brain. I think because I actually was probably one of the lucky few who received great advice at the beginning of my first venture, and I don't feel like I fell into a lot of the traps. And I think your point about making sure that you set up some of the rules in the front end. But is there any other advice you'd give to people that maybe are in their first couple of years or just starting something up, other than kind of that base document? Any other things like big gaps that you see that you think people should really focus on, or even just ways to like wrap your head around it? Any advice for people that way?
Yeah, heaps. Absolutely. So one part that people get wrong quite often is intellectual property and protecting their intellectual property. So you need to have a think about what is your intellectual property and whether or not it's actually worth protecting. So things like trademarks, is it worthwhile registering a trademark? A lot of people get that wrong. They do it too early. I've had so many clients, Mike, where they have registered a trademark early and then they've decided to rebrand 2 years later, and so it costs them twice as much. And you can't amend it. You've just got to pay the fees again. So I think registering trademarks too early and also registering them too late. Like there's a middle ground that you got to find once you've got that minimum viable product. So that's another big problem. Another one is not actually protecting their other intellectual property. So everyone in business all around the world does things differently and uniquely from everyone else in business. And actually documenting how you do things is something that is really, really important. People miss so often. So actually having your system documented in some way protects it. So a lot of people come to us and a team member might have left and stolen some intellectual property, but if it's not ever written down or protected, then there's nothing they can do to stop that. So those things like IP protection is something that, again, when we're in the business and we're working really hard, we don't think about, and that is often massively to our peril. Another thing would be getting all those foundations in place before you expand. So another problem that I see time and time again is people who expand too early before they get the foundations of their business set. And what happens is when they expand to with another shop or another location, any problems that you've got will multiply exponentially, and they'll become so much worse because you didn't fix them early on. So getting your systems and processes in place early before you expand is so important, something that so many people miss out on.
Yeah, I'd actually love to jump back to the point about intellectual property. I just want to clarify, because I think that's a really important thing, and I want to make sure I understood it correctly. So when you're saying that, are you talking about creating like standard operating procedures, recording video systems, like this is how we do it step by step via video that's locked in, it was recorded on a certain date, and so that's something that you can protect and own? Is that what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So your way of doing it now, whether or not you can protect your way of doing something, say drafting a document from a lawyer's perspective, you probably can't, but at least you've got it in place so that if you do want to expand in the future, then it's an easy way to show people how to do things. So it benefits on both sides.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah, and I think the excitement around expanding, and I think just as like an overall lesson of not having those procedures in place and then getting excited and then expanding. I mean, if I understand if you're not protected from a legal standpoint, but if you're not protected from an operations standpoint, growth can be a nightmare because the cracks start to just pop up all over the place. So
yep. Yeah, you see it time and time again. So phase 5 of the business legal lifecycle is protecting IP. And I do it deliberately there before any expansion so that people get everything set up properly early on and they don't fall into the trap that so many other people have.
Got it. And then do you offer any kind of a back end? So, I mean, it seems like a lot of this stuff is kind of, other than the SaaS model to the lawyers, which I like, if an individual is going through the process and then they get this doc that they can bring to their lawyer, do you have any other kind of like back end stuff, or can they come to you guys for consulting, or do you have any kind of recurring structure with that?
So they can definitely come to us. I don't have that set up. That is in the plans for the future, though. So if you're listening to this in years' time, we're doing this in 2020, but if you're listening to this in years to come, part of my plan is to build that out. I want to get a core of lawyers, though, and figure out what is actually going to be useful for them first, and then build that out. So I don't, I could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on it right now, but I've got to make sure that it's what they want. And so just building it progressively is definitely, but it's definitely up here in the brain. I'm pointing to my brain, to anyone listening. It's definitely there to be developed as we go.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That makes a ton of sense. Awesome, man. Well, look, I mean, this has been really insightful. I think these are a lot of things a lot of problems that a lot of people make, or a lot of errors, I guess you should say, that a lot of people make. And I think hearing it from someone like you, who's also a lawyer, you just have this like very personable, relatable, logical way. And I think that's partly you, partly the Aussie, I'm not sure. But, it was really, really insightful. And it doesn't feel, I think a lot of people fear conversations with lawyers because it feels like it's going to be overwhelming, or it feels like it's going to be, feeling like I'm going to get pressured into making some contracts or doing some documentation that I don't even need for the sake of billing. And it sounds like everything that you're doing is really to try and remove that element and really make this stuff approachable and feel doable for people.
That's precisely it. So I want to make it more accessible because, you're absolutely right. People do fear lawyers, or they fear going to lawyers, or they fear whatever it is. There's a fear there, and thank you for saying that I was more approachable. I don't know whether that's the Aussie or maybe it's the difference in the business that I'm in, and maybe it's why I've moved businesses away from the law firm. But it's definitely something that more lawyers need to do to better market themselves.
Yeah, absolutely love it. And then we were talking just before we started about the current climate. I'm gonna push the recording of this ahead because you had mentioned that you had created a resource, which will be an additional chapter in your book. But you do have that available for people, and I'd love you to tell me a little bit about that, and then let people know where they can find it. Yeah,
great. So I've called it Chapter 14 because there's 13 chapters in the book, and this is Chapter 14, and it's called. It's Lonely at the Top, Dealing with Crisis. And what it's about is, from a legal perspective, what you need to do in your business to protect yourself, especially right now. So what I've done is I got very interested because I love reading and I love learning, and I got very interested in how what's happening now. So we're talking in April 2020, how what's happening now maps against the stages of grief. And I learned quickly, not really the stages of grief, but the change curve. And so what I was able to do was look at what's happening now. I speak to business owners all around the world and really map out, okay, using the change curve, how are people going through that based on what's happened? And, with businesses being shut down all around the world, whole industries can't operate. And then governments have shut us down. So they're giving billions and trillions of dollars into markets to stop people from basically going without and stopping us from having breadlines and all the rest of that. So I wrote this additional chapter really to talk that through, and then to say, what happens next? Once we get through the anger and depression, you have to get to acceptance and then integrate it into your life. What does that look like from a legal perspective? So what I've done, and by the time this gets released, it'll be out there, is a page, especially for the podcast, called it's businesslegallifecycle.com/market-me. And I've put there the resource, it's called Chapter 14, and it takes you to the webpage that I've created for that chapter, which has actually got free copies of all my books available for people, a discount test for that I mentioned before to help people to find their blind spots in their business, because I think right now is the time that people can put those foundations in place. They can look at what's next, and then they can really build themselves out and be ready when the corona crisis ends to be on the way out and be successful going forward. So I put that resource together. I'm quite excited about it. It's as I put a lot of research and a lot of effort into working all that out and really working out what's next. And so if any of the listeners are interested in that, they can go to businesslegallifecycle.com/market-me.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a very valuable thing. I'm going to go check it out myself. It's always good, you never know what your blind spots are till you find them out. And so as much as you can be proactive and kind of look into that stuff, I think it's important. So we'll link that up in the show notes as well. But yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. I mean, great guy. And I wish you all the best with the business. It sounds like it's going to be really designed well for the future of business. And I think you're very progressively thinking about a lot of this stuff. So it's been great chatting with you.
Great being on. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Bye.